Welcome back to our latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training Tokyo, Japan, and my special guest today is Klaus Meder, who is the president of Bosch in Japan. Klaus, welcome to the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we were having a chat before we kicked off, and I think you mentioned you'd been here maybe 10 years now in Japan, was that right?
In total, no?
In total,
so
right?
I'm a repeater.
A repeater, okay.
So I worked in Japan for about 5 years, from the early 1996 until the end of 2000.
Okay.
And now again from the middle of 2017 on. So another half year, and then it's 10 years, yes.
Yes. So if we think back, to when you first came, you'd been leading teams outside of Japan, and then you get your first chance to lead teams inside Japan. What were some of the differences, or what were some of the challenges that you found?
Well, of course, at that time, that was a joint venture between a German company, Bosch, and a Japanese company, Zaxel Corporation at that time. And we were situated in Gunma-ken, in the city of Tomioka, and a joint venture with about 100 people, including production, and 4 Germans, and the rest was complete Japanese. And of course it was difficult to get heard, actually they had one translator who was helping me all the time. And the language barrier was a big problem, I have to say. And what helped me a lot was, of course, that I have worked in this area. This was ABAC control systems for quite a long time, and I knew the current generation of modules and the next generation and the over next. So I think, when you are a specialist and you know what you're doing, this helps you a lot. Yeah.
This gives you credibility with the
credibility,
team, right?
Connections to Germany, of course. Yeah, but working in Japan was not easy at that time. And of course, this was not Tokyo. It was complete, non-urban setting.
Yep.
And that was a challenge, yes.
Yeah. And so in terms of leading teams, what did you notice about leading a Japanese team that was a bit different from, say, leading a German team or another international group?
Well, I have to say that this team at that time was very Japanese.
Okay.
So it was not as international as Bosch Japan is today.
Today, yeah.
It was I would say, today people would say it was shobapoi. So we had, of course, a very strong president, Japanese gentleman, very strong, and the typical seating order in the office, where all the Bucho-san were sitting at the window side.
All the division heads, yep.
Yeah, and
the desk in front of them?
Yes,
Yeah,
everyone sitting, but in the back, no?
Nice.
So everyone was facing with the back, so you don't know where your boss was looking.
Oh, okay.
And so typical, I would say, seating order was like org chart, You could see the org chart in the seating order.
Right.
And it was very hierarchical. And the whole the organization was hierarchical, the communication was hierarchical, and that was very different from the experience in Germany. Yeah. Also the youngest engineer has to sit farthest away from his group manager,
Yes.
and then over years he could step up. So the seniority principle was also in the seating order.
See that?
That was very different than how are we working today. Yeah. And also very different from Germany. Yeah.
For you, in terms of dealing with the team, often in that very hierarchical structure, people are waiting for commands, being told what to do.
Right.
And so, tell me what to do, boss.
Right.
I'll do it perfectly, which is quite different to the West. We're expecting some initiative or expecting some, creativity or something like that. So what did you find how did you deal with that, where people are waiting for you to tell them what to do?
Yeah, well, I have to differentiate now really with this time, over 20 years ago and now.
Okay.
So I think at that time, it also made things easier.
Okay.
So you could tell people really, do this, I think as a leader, you had to take care to make the communication right.
Right.
So, for example, I think a typical problem is that the managers at that time didn't speak good English.
Right.
But some of the younger engineers, they spoke good English.
Right.
So one of the typical mistakes you have to avoid is speaking to the ones where you can communicate well, and not talk to the hierarchy, because you have problems in communicating.
Yes.
Therefore, my tip is you have to make the effort to talk to the people who are decisive in the hierarchy, even so if the communication is very difficult, but you have to do that, because if you kind of, leave them out of the process, that would make life very difficult. Yeah.
And were there any things that sort of, surprised you when you first started, working inside a very traditional Japanese organization?
Well, I have to say, yes, of course, we still do that, and I think it's really a good practice. You get a intercultural training before you come to Japan. Actually, you get at Bosch, you get an intercultural training wherever you go.
Right.
Even if you go to Switzerland or Austria, which is very close to Germany,
similar,
you get an intercultural training, because it might seem similar, but there are differences. Okay. Of course, in Japan, the differences are obvious. Everybody says, well, it's different culture. So, but there are many stereotypes, of course. So, for example, in my intercultural training, I was told Japanese are not direct. They don't look you in the eye. So, look at the knot of the tie when you talk to them. Yep. They're very calm, and so on. And to my surprise, at that time, the president of this joint venture, he was very direct, absolutely direct. Yeah. He was shouting at people, Yeah. And that was, for me, a kind of that's a reality shock in comparison.
Was he the owner of the company at that time?
No, it was a joint venture. It was a joint venture here.
So, but had he been the owner?
No, it was a joint
that's
venture.
Typical owner shacho, owner president type of behavior, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. At the moment, I would say it's kind of outdated management style. But at that time, it was kind of normal, I would say. And many of these things didn't fit to the stereotypes you were taught before. Also, at that time, I was 34, and I was the vice president of a small but interesting company, and that was untypical for Japan. So many people said to me right in the face, "You are too young." Oh, that also did not, fit to my expectation. Not be polite, be indirect, and so on. So I had my reality shocks at that time as well. Yeah.
What do you answer when people say you're too young? How do you reply to that?
Well, I always say that getting old is something which happens automatically. So this is not interesting, actually.
But also, you were very specialised in that particular area of technology. Probably you may be young in years, but you're probably quite experienced in that particular zone too.
Yeah, I think so.
Which I guess, as they became to see that, they'd appreciate that. Okay, this guy really knows his stuff, right?
That was no problem at that time. So, well, I always say, people, if you change jobs, you should take care that some of the pillars you're standing on are stable. And of course you have your expertise, which is important. Yep. You have but you also have language, you have culture, and you have network. And you shouldn't change jobs when you cut all these pillars and start from scratch. So I would say, when I started in Japan at that time, of course, culture and language was different. But the network to Germany, of course, to the headquarters where all the strategic and development decisions were taken, was of course important. One of the reasons why you become an expat. And of course also that you know your subject. Yeah.
And I guess also for the Japanese team, having someone like you who's got the connections back to Germany, around the technology and around the direction, that's a big plus, because for them, if they don't speak English well and they don't have those personal connections, it's very hard for them to work with the German side. But you're the type of, in the middle,
of course,
able to really explain to both sides what needs to happen. That's a big role, isn't it?
It's a big role, but you shouldn't be the ambassador or the mail boy or so.
Okay.
This is not the task, actually.
Right.
But you have to help in the process. And I think you also have to educate a little bit the German side, So at that time, we had email, but not like today, So a lot of the communication was done by fax. And when the fax came in German, we had a nice stamp. We put a stamp on it, which said, "Please resend in English. Nobody here speaks German," and we returned it.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, because that's so that was before Google Translate and things like this. So as the manager of such a group, you're not the translator the mail boy. So you have to educate the other side. Yeah,
it's interesting. This is very well organized in Japan. They actually had a stamp for that.
We made it.
You made it. Yeah.
We made it.
Well, I remember years ago. I'm from Queensland, Australia. I was in Brisbane. There's a guy. It was a business event. He was speaking. He was selling stone to Japan. He had a quarry. They'd cut the stone. They'd ship the stone to Japan. The Japanese would cut the stone for buildings and whatever. Right? And he was telling, this is back in the days of faxes, he'd get these faxes, and the faxes would have urgent stamped on the fax, right? And he kept on getting these, they're always urgent. And he thought to himself, wow, that's interesting. I don't even have a stamp in English with urgent. And here are these Japanese who don't speak English, have all got stamps with urgent on them. Yeah. And just thinking about, how organised the Japanese were. No, the foreigners are too slow, so you have to speed them up. But when you talk about the stamp, I just recall that story. So what other things did you notice? Did you take away from that 5 years any things that you thought about the way the system worked in Japan as you got to know it, that you thought, well, this is quite good. I could transport this into my next job or into the culture back in Bosch or into the organization there. Was there any things you could actually take back from the experience in Japan?
Well, I think that what we did, we were kind of small team, small management team with adjacent production. You just went through one door and then you were on the production floor. And we had very good communication and also very, very short information times. And I tried to do that as well in Germany, so that some of the people said I became a little bit Japanese after that time. So,
really?
So that's something you can take back. Yeah. And one other thing was that we were, of course, very much concentrated on our business. So as a kind of small team in the countryside in Japan, there was little distraction. So we were really focusing on what we were doing. I like that very much, I have to say. And back in Germany, I always thought that there is many things which are not really your business focus, which could kind of take your attention away. So therefore
distract you.
Yeah. So I think that's also one of the good things to learn here.
And what about the second time you came back? So you had quite a break between visit one and visit two. And I imagine the company had changed quite a bit in Japan between those two visits as well, right?
Absolutely.
So when you came back the second time, what were some of the leadership challenges you had the second time around?
Well, so first of all, I think the company changed dramatically in this time. So when this process has actually started when I was here. Right. So we increased our shareholding in our Japanese partner. We later took over many of the joint ventures, 100%. We included them. So the company, which was like less than 500 people when I left, the Bosch Japan, less than 500 people when I left, is now about 7,000 people.
Wow, 500 to 7,000.
Yeah, because we included these. At that time, the most of the business was done in joint ventures, licensees, and so we included and integrated, we merged this into one Bosch group in Japan. It's a very big change. Yeah.
Well, I presume that process started when you were here, but was it completed by the time you got back?
No.
Because that's a big deal, any two companies trying to integrate is always a nightmare everywhere. But I think particularly in Japan, where the sort of everyone knows the roots of people. Oh, that guy came from that part of the organization, and that guy came from that company, and this guy came from this company. They all know, and they have their patrons, and they have their support. Then they have their disciples. This hierarchical thing. So, what were some of the challenges that you faced trying to keep integrating these different companies into one big unit called Bosch Japan?
Well, the process started when I was here. So. We were developing and producing ABAC control units, so it's electronics. So we integrated the electronics production of our Japanese mother company at that time, and we integrated also the electronics production of other joint ventures all together. So it started at that time, but it was by far not finished. Yeah. And nowadays, as you said, still people say I started in this company and so on. But I think that the Bosch spirit is really now alive, and the discussion started in this company or in this joint venture is not that prevalent anymore. And
what's made that difference? Because in a lot of companies, it never goes away. They have their seniors, who've even retired from the company are still always their seniors, and they have that line up there, and it tends to stick in Japan. What were you able to do to create that Bosch spirit so that wasn't the predominant way of identifying who you were? You now identify I'm part of Bosch Japan. What were you able to do to make that change?
Well, first of all, I think we have a good starting point because we did not just take over companies which had no relationship with Bosch.
Right.
So actually the relationship was very, very long. So starting already with licenses which were given already in the 1930s.
Oh,
so
okay.
So there was already a very, very long relationship with the mother company. So whether it was based on a joint venture or based on a license, and there was for decades there was exchange, and I think that helps a lot when you then merge also the legal entities. When you have already this very, very good personal relationship and industrial relationship, and also of course product relationship. So the products based on license from Bosch, of course they are similar. So it's nothing that you have to totally clean up the portfolio or something like this. So I think we had a very good starting point. So and of course this helps also the culture, that the people know already how the others are ticking in Germany, and so I think all this helped in this process.
Okay, when you think about getting team engagement, like you went from 500 to 7,000. That's a big number, right?
It's a big number.
What have you found works well for getting engagement of the team, to get people? Because often my experience with engagement surveys has been that you turn up to the international hub, it's usually Hong Kong or Singapore, and they get you in a room, all the leaders in the room. They're putting up on the screen the global results of the engagement survey, and then APAC is always lower than everywhere else.
Right.
And then at the very bottom of APAC is always Japan.
Right.
And then you get lots of pressure about why aren't the Japanese engaged? Look at these numbers, And so you always have these issues around engagement in Japan as a topical issue. Now I have my doubts about the translation of the questions often. I have doubts about the questions themselves. But regardless of that, in general terms, what have you found works well in terms of getting teams engaged?
Well, I also have my doubts here. There are also other figures like number of working hours, for example, which are much higher in Japan in comparison to the US or Germany. And I always think that our guys are very motivated in doing things. And in the surveys, which we also do frequently, we have the same effect. Yeah, that when we ask people, so are you, for example, one of the interesting questions which differs quite a lot is, would you recommend Bosch to one of your relatives or friends?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the questions where in other countries we get over 90% yes. In Japan, the figure is lower. We always ask ourselves, why is this the case? And we think that this is one of the questions where culture plays a role. So taking responsibility, personal responsibility for someone you are really linked to, like a relative or a good friend. And so responsibility to the one who maybe joins the company, and also responsibility to your employer, because you never know whether it works out well. So, and in this aspect, I think the Japanese answer is very much reflected. And we should also not forget that we have a much smaller team here. So when I refer a relative to the 101 more person to the 160,000, about 160,000 people working in Germany with many, many locations, you may actually never meet your friend or relative or son of relative or something in the big world. But here that's different. Teams are much smaller, we have less locations, very much concentrated here in the Kanto area, whether it's production or engineering. And I think people think twice about it. But from this, I wouldn't say that this is less engagement. So I actually think our people are very much engaged and feel very much as a part of the company.
And what have you found works to bolster that engagement or improve that engagement or just create that engagement? What are things have you seen work well?
So I think that communication is very important. To give you an actual, so from our time, an example. So we have, of course, Corona crisis. Everyone is in Corona crisis. What we are doing in the company is every week we have a Corona crisis meeting, and we invite about 40 managers to discuss the next steps. So what are we doing? And we publish the result. And I personally write a blog. In the beginning it was more often, now it's once a month. How is situation in the Bosch world? How is the so worldwide? How is situation in Japan? What and why have we decided? And also sometimes I include some personal opinions. For example, travel bans or something like this. And that is very much appreciated by the associates. So of course we can count how many people are viewing this. So only with my blog we can reach, sometimes times are different, but sometimes we can reach about 1 in 4 employees, which I think is very good. It's a very good reach. And I think this kind of active communication, this is also what keeps people motivated. I think they feel valued, that they get the direct communication to them, and this helps a lot.
Is the blog translated into Japanese?
Yes.
Okay, so there's no barrier to entry on that.
So I write it in English, and then it's translated.
Okay. Yeah, and that's very good. And that communication piece is so critical to sharing, isn't it? And so I think that's great. I noticed also that you referred to the team as associates.
Yeah.
Now, that's very interesting. You know, being an associate and being a staff member is quite a different mental approach, isn't it? So is that a Bosch global thing that everyone's called an associate, or is this a Japan thing?
I think I know it from my colleagues in the US, yes. And so we refer sometimes to us as Boschless. So we are Boschless. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's in general Mitarbeiter, so people who work together, all together. Yeah. And by the way, I would also like to mention that it's not only the communication, it's also really practical things. So we did, for example, a vaccination activity. So on our premises, we vaccinated about 4,000 people. So,
oh, wow.
Which is, I think, in comparison to the number of associates,
yeah,
it's quite a good number.
Quite a good number, yeah.
And that was very much appreciated. So also because we extended it not only to the employees or associates, but also to their family members.
Okay.
And
nice.
When people came with their family members to get the vaccine, many people wrote thank you letters, because that's something, you can really show that company is doing something for the associates.
Yeah, no, it's a very smart move. In terms of one of the things you need to have creativity is to have engagement, because if people aren't engaged, well, they just don't care to make it better. There's no input to make it better. But if they're engaged, then you've always got that opportunity for, it could be small pieces of Kaizen style, iterative improvements in things. It could be major things. Do you have a system in Bosch, or have you found something in Bosch that works well for getting creativity from people?
We have several systems. Yeah. So of course, on the shop floor, we have CIP, the continuous improvement process. I mean, very much also inspired by our founder, who said you should never stop making things better. You should never be complacent and always have to improve. But also from the Toyota production system. Right? The Toyota production system, I think, had a big influence on Bosch. So we learned a lot from Toyota, and we have now the Bosch production system, where you cannot just copy something. We have Bosch production system, and we place a lot of focus on improving things and learning from mistakes, having a good failure culture. And that is not only for production, but also for all kind of processes, maybe like a purchasing process or others as well. For the creativity, of course, we do hackathons, and we also have internal startups. Yeah, so we are asking actively our associates to come up with new ideas. And suggest these new ideas to a jury, and then we pick the good ones we think are the good ones, and give them a small budget to maybe create a sample. And there is a internal platform if these ideas become bigger and bigger, so that we can develop them. Kind of like a accelerator or incubator, but Bosch internally. And we do that worldwide. We do it also in Japan. We see that it bears fruit. But I think actually, like in all the startups scene, that you need 10,000 ideas or more to get 100 good ones, and of these 100 good ones, maybe one survives. And we don't have. We hope, of course, that one of them, these ideas, will be a money-making idea in the future. But besides this hope, there's also it's very important that there is a platform that people can show their ideas and discuss their ideas, and that it's heard by the management, and that there is a interaction. I think this is maybe even worth more than just hoping that one of the 10,000 ideas will be a good business idea. When we talk about engagement. Yeah.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Oh, that's impressive. And I guess when you have that type of approach from the company side, you're really encouraging people to start thinking about things,
exactly.
and also give them budget and give them time and give them resources. I guess the general part of the culture build is we are a dynamic company with innovation as a centerpiece of our culture,
Right.
and we demonstrate that.
Exactly.
Here's how we show. We're not just talking about, oh yes,
Right.
we believe in creativity and you do nothing.
Yeah.
That's a very solid proof that you actually do it. So I guess that starts to get people's brains thinking. They may not have something, maybe it's a product, but they might have a process they might improve. Might be,
exactly.
we're office workers, a lot of us.
Right.
What could we improve in our systems? What could we improve in our efficiency? That type of thing. Yeah, that's very good. That's very good, very good. And one of the things I found in my company, the way of working is different. In Australia, where I was taught, we would go to the workplace early, work really hard, and then finish, and you go home. You go to sports. I used to go to the karate dojo after work, finish at 5 and go down the dojo and 5:30 start training, and other people are going to rugby or whatever they're doing, right? So we had a very early start, finish, then go into something else. But in Japan, COVID's changed a lot of things for people working home, but normally they spend a lot of time commuting, a lot of time in the office, late home. It's a very elongated day. So day after day, the pace of work, the concentration of the work sort of gets a bit diluted. And we're a small company, we're not 7,000 people, but for us, I always believe that speed is important. And I keep having to drive with the team. We have to move faster. We're a small company, we have to be agile, we have to be flexible. Speed is an advantage for us. We don't take a lot of decision making, we can do it quickly. So just trying to drive that speed, have more of that intensity. How have you found, the speed differences in Japan in terms of the way people work compared to elsewhere?
This is also a good question. As you said, I think COVID has changed a lot. So I think the working time has shifted a lot. So this late start, sometimes like 10, 11 or so, I think it's not so popular anymore. And this has something to do with commuting, I think, that in the past people avoided maybe the very, very crowded trains and came quite late. This is not the case anymore. And I think in this aspect we may become a little bit closer to the usual office times, like we see it in Germany or the US. But speed, actually, I don't think that I see big differences in speed. I think it's more should I say, is time of the essence. So this feeling, that I know that also from Germany. Of course, I'm German. That doing something in as little hours, as few hours as possible, because efficiency is something important. So whether I spend 7 hours or 10 hours makes a big difference. And I think that this doesn't play such an important role here. So because people are not that much focused on finishing everything in certain amount of time, which is maybe also a possibility to improve. Efficiency is something which can always be improved.
What about trust? We talk about getting engagement, we talk about getting creativity. One of the big things in this country culturally is trust. It's very much a trust-based culture. And so what have you found works well for building trust with the teams?
Well, also I think communication, we said already, is something which is very important. In general, I think that the teams in Japan are really built on trust. To give you one example, of course we pay overtime, but we do not have an automatic time recording system like we have in Germany. So everyone has to clock in and clock out. Here, this is completely built on trust. So everyone is recording by himself or herself the working time, although everybody knows that it has an impact on overtime payment, and there's complete trust in this system. So I think that is one of the really good examples where we as a company put trust in the people, and the people will record diligently how much time they have worked. And I think this works as well with the home office, because there's no social control anymore, but still we have the same system, and we still trust that our associates, record their time without such an automatic system, diligently and correct, of course.
It's interesting because in the past, Japanese workers who are not particularly highly paid by relative standards, perhaps other countries, would work overtime to get more money, and there was no controls over that. So people would just say, "Oh, I want more money. I'll work more hours." Whether there's a need to work hours or not is a different question, right? So that's interesting that you have that trust facility, knowing that they're not going to abuse that trust. They're not going to just clock up a lot of hours to make more money, right?
Exactly.
So,
and I think if a company shows this trust, then also there's trust is built up, vice versa, and I think that's a very important system,
Yeah, we take a little bit of a different approach. As a small company, we need to appeal to people in a different. We're not a big company like Bosch, but we say basically no overtime. We just say there's no overtime. If you need to work overtime, then you have to apply. You have to get permission to work overtime. So people who are looking for a different type of work, non-work lifestyle, that's attractive. When you're doing interviews with people and you say, well, we don't have overtime, they go, oh, good, because they're thinking, great. Because in their Japanese companies, often they're working extremely long hours, not by choice. And so to differentiate ourselves a little bit, so we flipped it around the other way. Not so much that it was about a trust issue, but more of a PR issue with new employees, that this is a place where I'm not expected to work till 11 o'clock at night like I was in my current company or in my previous company. So interesting that you've gone that way.
But we have the same system. So overtime in principle has to be, advised by the managers.
Yes.
So far to the theory, but in practice, if there's an important thing to solve and it cannot be leveled out in the flex time, then people will do the overtime and later go to their manager and say, I had to do this, and then afterwards it is signed, approved. But in principle, it's the same system that nobody can just
suddenly
time.
decide
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So in principle,
Right,
it's the same system.
Right. Yeah. And when you think about leadership, what's your definition of leadership?
Well, I think it's very important that leaders are approachable and that they follow their own conviction, that they are trustworthy in the sense that they don't speak the one way and do the other way, so walk the talk.
Walk the talk, yep.
That's very, very important, I think. And so people are not stupid. They really see immediately if people do not walk the talk, and therefore I think that's very, very important. And I also think that there are, of course, times when you don't have to lead, especially because everything is okay, everything's running smooth, and so on, and then you can just leave that to your team. But I think that, for example, in this Corona crisis, it is very important that leaders bring the people together and make clear decisions, because so it's not only that leaders want to lead, also people want to be led. Yeah, and if this doesn't fit together, that's a very hard time for leaders. So I really think that leaders need a good sense to when to let loose, and also when to lead, actually. And for this, I really think that communication, trust, and walk the talk is very important.
And if you were giving some advice to someone they don't know Japan, they haven't worked here, they don't speak the language, they're being sent out to Japan to run the organization, what would be some advice that you'd give them?
To run the organization in Japan, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that much of the Japanese society and companies are built on respect. So I think it's very good if to be respectful. It can never hurt. And for example, one of my managers once said to me that when I left, and he said, when I gave you a report, you always said thank you. I was never thanked before. It was interesting, you know.
Okay.
That, so I said he always had the impression that the work was appreciated, yeah. And I think that respect is very important, and of course it's good to understand the culture, also how roles are actually seen. That you know, all these typical things like uchi, soto, and
Yes.
So this is really important to understand it.
outer,
Yeah,
yep.
in and out. You have to understand that, and I think then you also understand how to interact with the people. You know? And I think that's very important. So also this role of the customer, of course, yeah, that customer orientation is absolutely important in Japan, and there's very often no discussion, you know, if the customer wants something, which is a typical, source of conflict,
Yes.
Especially when the Japanese organization wants to follow the customer's wishes, but it doesn't fit to like a standard product, for example. This is a typical source of conflict in our job, in our business. And I think here also, so how you, for example, try to convince a customer. You can tell the customer it's impossible, which means also disrespect. Or you can say, let's talk about it. What kind of advantages has it this way, that way? What kind of disadvantage has it if you just say yes? And to take these wishes really seriously, you know. And I think this is what the tip I would give, you know, be respectful and don't say no too fast. Maybe consider it and come up with a suggestion or counter proposal later, but don't say impossible or no, even if it doesn't fit in the beginning.
It's interesting to hear you say impossible. I love that choice of word because, in Japanese we have the word muzugashi translated as difficult into English, for example, But if you tell Australians, for example, and this happens all the time when they're dealing with Japanese companies, that it's going to be difficult, the Australian mind is going, no problem, no problem. We're getting over difficulties all the time down there. Yeah. We'll find a way through. Okay. You have to translate it for them as it's impossible. When you tell them the translation, the Japanese says muzugashi, you say, he just said it's impossible. Oh, they really step back and think, okay, really. It's just interesting in the translation of things into English. The nuance is different.
Yeah, of course. But on the other side, if a German says it's impossible, it doesn't mean it can mean it's complicated. Maybe it's not really impossible. Yeah, but maybe it just doesn't fit.
Right, right.
It's different.
But again, right?
Yeah, but for the Japanese, that means complete no.
Yeah, exactly.
So if something's like impossible, then it means we don't have to talk more about it.
We're done now. That's done.
Yeah. It's done. And that is something we have to adapt in this aspect. Now, we shouldn't make false promises or something like this, but we have to come to compromises. Yeah? And so it's not black and white. Very often it's not black and white. And muzugashi means maybe not just a little difficult, but already 90% no. But impossible sounds like it doesn't work 100%. You can forget it, but there still might be a way to do something. And this is what our business is all about. Yeah.
Yeah, I just use that example because I spent a lot of time working on bringing Australian products and services into Japan, working with Australian exporters, trying to explain to them why they're getting nowhere with the Japanese side, and check your understanding what you think is really going on here. In terms of other things for someone who's new to Japan, what would be some other advice you'd give them, apart from what you've already talked about?
Well, definitely I would say try to make an effort to learn the language. Okay. Well, it is complicated, maybe one of the most difficult languages you can try to master, but the effort is also rewarded. So even if it's just a few words, I think the counterpart is appreciating the effort. So I think that's an important point. And also maybe to study a little bit the gestures.
Yes.
Yeah. So because you can read a lot from gestures, even so if something is not 100% spoken.
Yeah.
So especially very well in the Japanese grammar, the decisive word comes at the end.
Verb comes at the end. Yeah.
Sometimes it's not spoken out.
No.
And then you have to guess from the body language. Is it yes or no? Because the sentence is stopped before this actual word is spoken out. So body language is also very, very important, I would say.
Even with the language, when I was a student at Georgia University, for some reason I can't remember why, I had to talk to an older Japanese professor, lady professor. And I was still learning Japanese. So my Japanese was sort of student Japanese, because that's mainly the people I was talking with, right? So it wasn't polite enough, right?
Of course.
And it was my first experience that she replied to me. Very polite language, but dripping with ice.
Okay.
I'd insulted her.
Yeah.
The way I spoke. Yeah. I'd said something. And I realized straight away, I don't know what I said because my Japanese just wasn't good enough to know what was the problem. But I knew I've said something the wrong way here. But her language reply to me was super polite. It was almost like the other way. By going super polite, she was really leveraging the point that I wasn't being polite.
You were not polite.
I never forget that.
Yes.
It's like if you looked at the words written down, you think, oh, she's so nice, you know.
Yeah.
Her face and body language wasn't so nice about what I said. So that's another example, isn't it?
But of course, you get if you don't make very, very, very problematic mistakes, you get some kind of tolerance, of course, as a foreigner.
Yeah, you get some free pass sometimes.
Yes.
No free pass that day for me.
No, not that.
No free pass. Yeah. And, are there any other things that I could have asked you about, Klaus, about leading in Japan that we haven't covered already?
Any other things about leading in Japan? Well, I think that the one important point is that we should encourage people to make the next steps. So you know the Japanese saying, "Ishi no ue mo sannen." So you should endure even if it's hard on top of a stone, sitting on top of a stone, and
for 3 years.
For 3 years. So I think many, let's say careers, let's say careers are not progressing in the international comparison at the right pace in Japan.
You think they're behind the pace?
Yes. They spend too much time in the same position before they make a next step. And so I always tell my people, so think about your school life, education life.
Yes.
So every 3 to 5 years, you went to a different school, different step, whether it's kindergarten or high school or university. It's always like 3 to 5 years periods. And why should you, when you enter your professional life, why should you do 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, exactly the same thing? That is not good, neither for the personal career. Also, it's not good for a company because once you make changes, you will definitely notice that you have a lot to bring to a new job. There are many similarities how you can grow, and also the field surrounding you will grow. So we always tell people, so same approach, 3 to 5 years. You know, you shouldn't make it too short. Makes no sense to make a new move every year because you actually could master what you are doing. But think in terms of 3 to 5 years to make another step. And in the international comparison, at least what I can see, is that our Japanese associates are too slow, spending too much time in the same position.
Why is that? What's driving that, do you think?
Well, I think part of it is that the people are not encouraged to make the next step. This is one thing. Another thing is, of course, that it's we talked about it before. It's really tough to fill openings. It's difficult in Japan. So to let someone go is difficult because you may have a hard time to fill again. But I really think that's important. It's better for the individual and it's better for the company when people make the next step and grow themselves and help also the teams to grow by this.
I've heard from other CEOs here that similar to you, they're trying to progress people through the system.
Right.
And they'll recognise someone doing very good work, you know, and they'll say, you know, well, you're doing really good work. We want to offer you this position, next step up, right?
Yeah.
And they're surprised because the Japanese associate will say, no, I need another 2 years. I'm not ready yet. It's too early. Whereas in a Western culture, if you got offered the job, great, I'll take it, you know, and move up. You've got that ambition to keep moving up through the ladder.
Right.
But the Japanese are saying, no, I'm not ready yet. And I think one of that comes back to that perfectionism, no errors, make no mistakes, fully competent to do your job, be accountable, be responsible for it. And so in a way, they're sort of holding themselves back till they get to some sort of higher state of perfection, I guess, before they feel comfortable to move on. So how do you get around that? How do you convince people, look, no, you don't need to be perfect?
Well, I think we have the same issue with promoting females. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So just in general, so if you offer a male associate the next step, I can do it. Yeah, and female may most likely say, I have to wait another 1-2 years, and more concentrating what you still have to learn and not what you can do already. And even with promoting females, we help our associates to not to be shy, not to see only the risks, but also to see the chances. And the same thing we do in Japan, of course, and try to communicate that this is normal. Yeah, and it's also important in the international comparison. Yeah, so we have an internal program we call Leadership from Japan. Yeah, but what we mean by this is also that we are also able to send leaders to the international Bosch world, Japanese leaders. It's also very important. Yeah.
And
so
did you send many? Is that a good?
We send some. We send some. We have exchange programs, and we have, of course, Japanese plant managers in other countries and so on. But I would say when we look in the distribution of nationalities in the international assignments, there should be more.
Well,
there should be more.
Look at the 5-star hotels. I always think about that in Tokyo. How many 5-star hotels here have Japanese general managers?
I have no idea.
Virtually none. Okay. It's a rare thing. And if you go overseas, you stay in a hotel, and you get some nice note from the GM when you turn up. It's usually never Japanese. So I often wonder myself. 5-star hotels are very internationally focused. The people who work there want to work in some sort of international environment, and yet there's very little examples of people actually stepping up into those positions and being global because they don't want to go overseas. So it's a bit strange, isn't it?
We have internally so-called talent pools. So for different, let's say, hierarchy steps, we have talent pools, and if you are a talent for becoming a department manager in Japan, but the person who has reached this talent pool is already 50.
Yes.
How big or small is the chance that this person will make the next 2 steps?
No.
It's really complicated, yeah? So if these career steps are not done in like this 5 or maybe 6, 3 to 5 years steps, then the probability is really low that there will be steps coming after that. So therefore I think we have to always communicate that it's important to think about the next steps. We have really, really nice instruments for that, and we do them diligently, but still we are not there where we are. And therefore we're still communicating that you can build your career also partly yourself by not being complacent and trying to stay where you are, but also looking for the next step in a, of course, defined in certain time.
The other thing we notice too is that in a Western culture, if you tell people, okay, there's going to be some training, companies organize some training for you, be it internal, external, doesn't matter. People are keen to go, oh, great, I'm going to get some training. This will help me so I can get my career to keep going, In the Japanese case, often when they're told there's going to be training, they're like, no, I'm too busy. I don't want to go. Sounds boring. They don't have that same energy to go, because we're a training company, right? So we often get a lot of people come into the training room And you can see they've been sent by their boss. They don't want to be there.
Okay.
They're like, why am I here? No one's briefed them on why they're there. It's out to us to get them enthusiastic and motivated, which we do, but the starting point compared to a Western environment is very, very low. So how about, I mean, we're doing a lot of training for Bosch, thank you very much. And we do our best to, these are leaders, we're teaching the leaders, right? So they're, or obviously it's a key for them, but just generally your thoughts about, training, the sort of attitude to training, the attitude to development. It's a little bit similar to that getting the promotion, a sort of difference to the West. What do you think?
It's a difficult question. I think that the younger generation is very thankful and very open for trainings. But I can also see that people who have, let's say, like a 20 years working experience, that they are kind of, leave me alone. I mean, I have better things to do. I can see that as well. But actually, you should never stop learning. And
I think you mentioned your founder, right? But never stop improving.
Never
right?
stop improving. Never stop learning. And we make an effort to bring this into the organization. We had the International Learning Days. So that we really promoted learning, and we have a lot of internal trainings and also invited external speakers. I mean, nowadays with the technical equipment we have, this is great. So we can offer training worldwide. And everyone can join. So we have now training sessions where 400, 500 people are joining.
Wow. Okay.
Online.
That's something.
And this is something we couldn't do before. So I think for learning, we have the best. We have the best environment we ever had before. When I was starting to learn Japanese, I bought kind of every book which is available, and I have at home like
library books,
2 meters Japanese language books. And now for the second time, I think I bought one book, and the rest I do online. With apps. So I think we have really the best environment we ever had for learning.
Well, on that note, let's wind it up, and let me say thank you very much, Klaus, for
giving
us your time today. A busy president like yourself, appreciate that. So join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.